In this video, I'm going to give you all the details on Bryan Kohberger's plea deal, the legal battles the defense faced leading up to the plea deal, how the victims' families are responding to the plea deal, and whether Kohberger can make any money off media related to his crimes. And I want to apologize for the relatively informal setup here. I'm on vacation with my family, but this news is essential to get out to you guys, so I took the day off of vacationing and I decided to do research and film this video. And before we get started, I want to introduce myself. My name is Carolyn Kraft, and I'm a lawyer, and I dive into true crime, ethics, psychology, and how these topics converge. So without further ado, let's get going. Now, some quick background. Bryan Kohberger, at the time of the murders, was a 28-year-old doctoral candidate at Washington State University, and he was studying criminology. He was arrested a little over a month later after DNA found on the knife sheath left at the crime scene showed a near certain probability of familial match through Kohberger's father. Later samples taken from Kohberger after his arrest provided a statistical match. Since then, additional evidence has surfaced, such as his phone being in close proximity to the victim's house 12 times in the months leading to the murders, eyewitnesses matching his car to the car that the task force was seeking, Kohberger's internet postings, etc. I do want to say a lot of the evidence besides the DNA is circumstantial, but that is what they had. In May of 2023, Kohberger entered a plea of not guilty to the first-degree murder charges. But today, he entered a plea deal pleading guilty to 4 counts of first-degree murder and burglary. There are a few legal battles that took place leading up to this that likely influenced Kohberger's decision to enter the plea deal, and I want to discuss that. First, the defense long suggested the alternate perpetrator theory, which is the defense that one or more people other than Kohberger killed the students. In Idaho specifically, the law requires the alternate perpetrator theory to be approved by a judge before the trial begins and before the jury can hear that theory. Jay Logsdon, Kohberger's attorney, has argued that there was no connection between Mr. Kohberger and the victims. He said specifically, there is no explanation for the total lack of DNA evidence from the victims in Mr. Kohberger's apartment, office, home, or vehicle. In the court filing, the defense also said that lab analysts were aware of 2 additional males' DNA within the house where the deceased lived. They also found another unknown man on a glove found outside the residence on November 20th of 2022. Nonetheless, in late June, Judge Hippler denied the request to identify specific alternate perpetrators before the jury, saying that only rank speculation by the jury would link these proposed alternate perpetrators to the crime at hand. The defense was also trying to strike the death penalty as punishment, arguing that Kohberger has autism spectrum disorder, or ASD, and that executing him would violate the 8th Amendment's prohibition on cruel and unusual punishment. They said that he displays extremely rigid thinking, perseverates on specific topics, processes information on piecemeal basis, struggles to plan ahead, and demonstrates little insight into his own behaviors and emotions. Due to his ASD, they argue that Kohberger cannot comport himself in a manner that aligns with societal expectations of normalcy, and as a result, this creates a risk that he'll be executed because of his disability rather than his culpability. They specifically cite Atkins v. Virginia, a case heard in 2002 by the U.S. Supreme Court, to support their argument. In this case, it ruled people with intellectual disabilities cannot be executed for a crime because it would violate the 8th Amendment. In this specific case, the court held that the death penalty, when used as punishment for people with intellectual disabilities, did not fulfill the objectives of retribution and deterrence because people with intellectual disabilities are less likely to understand why they are being punished in certain ways or take lessons from how others in similar situations are punished. In addition, the individuals are less likely to seem sympathetic because of their communicative deficiencies and cognitive isolation from those around them. As a result, they are at great risk for receiving the death penalty from a jury that may misinterpret their demeanor and reactions. But the thing is that autism is not classified as an intellectual disability. And in addition, in Atkins v. Virginia, the defendant had an IQ of 59, which is significantly lower than the average IQ for the adult human, which is around 100. So this likely makes Atkins v. Virginia distinguishable from Kohberger's situation. And it seems the court actually agreed because it ruled that autism spectrum diagnosis would not prevent Kohberger from potentially being sentenced to the death penalty if convicted. The defense also tried to enter an official alibi. They submitted that Mr. Kohberger has a long habit of going for drives alone. Often he would go for drives at night. He did so late on November 12th and into November 13th, 2022. Mr. Kohberger is not claiming to be at a specific location at a specific time. But the judge barred them from entering an official alibi because no one could vouch for where Kohberger actually was on the night of November 12th. So here we are, where Kohberger has now taken a plea deal after a very long wait for when the trial is supposed to start. And I'm kind of moving back and forth between shock and kind of saying, okay, that makes sense. See, the defense was kind of left with their hands tied behind their back since a lot of their efforts to prove his innocence were unsuccessful. So, because of all of that, if they went to trial, really the only thing they could argue was that the prosecution could not prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Kohberger did it. And in such a gruesome case, despite a lot of evidence being circumstantial, that is a huge risk to take, especially when the death penalty is on the table. That being said, to take a plea deal in a first-degree murder case where he agrees to life in prison without parole versus taking a gamble at trial is a lot. That's a bit shocking. For me, life in prison without parole is a death sentence. It is the same thing. Actually, it's probably worse in my opinion. But everyone has their own opinions on that, and I have never been in a situation where I was choosing between life without parole versus the potential of the death penalty. I do want to say, though, the judge asks Kohberger if he is pleading guilty because he is guilty. And Kohberger says yes, he is pleading guilty because he is guilty, because he did it, he murdered those individuals, those students. The judge was making sure that Kohberger was not pleading guilty because of coercion, certain promises made to him, because of fear of the death penalty, etc. And these questions are very relevant because many people who oppose plea deals are concerned about why someone is actually taking a plea deal, because they are actually guilty or because they feel they have to despite being innocent. There's some kind of coercion, or they don't think that the trial is going to be fair towards them, whatnot. But of course, the ethics of plea deals, that's a whole nother can of worms that I'm going to go into later, but not in this video. So the victims' families are actually split about how they feel on the plea deal. The Goncalves family on Facebook said they are beyond furious with the state of Idaho and that the state has failed them. Elsewhere, they said that they were not even called about the plea deal and instead received an email with a letter attached, which is pretty impersonable, I have to say. Their attorney said, "The issue is they are trying to cram the plea for July 2nd, only giving the families a day to get to Boise." And I think that's a very fair feeling, 100%. But the judge actually decided to address this issue and apologized to the families of the victims and to the family of the defense. He felt it was important to get the plea deal done as soon as possible for administrative and financial reasons, especially given how close the start of the trial was and jury selection. He just wanted to get through it as fast as possible so that the state didn't spend more money in something that was unnecessary. And so people didn't spend more time also in something that was unnecessary and was just going to be a plea bargain anyway. Now, Kaylee's father, Steve Goncalves, then went on News Nation and expressed his disagreement and anger very explicitly.
"This is anything but justice. This is the opposite of our will. There was no majority believing that this was acceptable. I want to honor all the police officers, the FBI, and all the people that work their tail off. The failure is at the court level, 100%. But the men in the boots on the ground and the women that were out there working, I want to honor everything that they did for our children, 100%. The fault is in leadership and the people that you place this evidence upon. They were weak. They decided to play God and decide what this man's decision should be, and not a jury, not a peers, not his peers. They, so that's where we are today."
He puts the blame on the court system and leadership, while also making sure to praise law enforcement and investigators for the work they did to find the truth and to seek justice. And it seems he is really upset that leadership essentially robbed Kohberger's peers, the jury, from deciding his fate. And that's what he means when he says that the leadership decided to play God, or at least that's what it seems that's what he meant. Now, Jeff, Zana's father, also disagrees with the plea deal. He says specifically that the deal is a missed opportunity to set a stronger precedent in how accountability should be handled in cases like this. And he also says it could have sent a message to others that these kinds of horrific crimes carry real consequences. Instead, 4 beautiful lives were taken, and the person responsible won't be used as an example to help prevent something like this from happening again. Now, the families of the other 2 victims actually support the plea deal. Ben Mogan, Madison's father, said he was choosing acceptance and that the plea deal would let his family avoid a trial and allow their wounds to keep healing. And Ethan's mother, Stacy, said her family would be in court on Wednesday in support of the plea bargain. Now, another topic I really want to cover before I sign off here is the Son of Sam law, because I've been seeing a lot of questions about this. The Son of Sam law prevents criminals from profiting off the publicity surrounding their crimes. It targets earnings from book deals, movie rights, or other media inspired by their offense. It's actually how our legal system balances free expression with ethical concerns, which is, in my nerdy legal opinion, very interesting. In addition, I think a lot of us would agree that allowing a murderer to profit off a book they wrote about, the murders, would be very problematic and unethical, and it could potentially incentivize people to engage in heinous crimes if big financial payouts followed thereafter. And so I think it makes a lot of sense to have these laws in the book. Now, there are a lot of specifics about the Son of Sam law that I'm not going to go into here, but I wanted to add this in here to say that Idaho does not actually have a specific Son of Sam law on the books, but it does have laws that allow for the seizure of profits from criminals who attempt to profit from their crimes. And the goal of these laws is to ensure that any financial gains from such activities are instead redirected to compensate the victims. And I think that's kind of a big deal, and especially nowadays with true crime being so popular, and I'm sure with a murder like this, multiple murders like this in a situation like this, we're probably going to have a docuseries come out or a movie come out about it. And I don't think the individuals who, the perpetrators, the individuals who did these crimes should be making money off of that. I think that is incredibly unethical. So it makes sense that these laws are on the book, and I'm glad Idaho has that. So with all of that, we are now at the very end. This plea deal has concluded a long-winded and painful case that began on November 13th of 2022 and dragged on until July 2nd of 2025. With all of that, I really want your guys' opinion on this. What do you think about the plea deal? What do you think about plea deals in general? What do you think about Kohberger taking it? About the judge's various rulings that limited the defense team's options? I'd truly love to hear your guys' thoughts, so drop it in the comments. I'll be responding so we can have a really interesting discussion about the Kohberger case, but also ethics involved in the judicial system. So with all of that, thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.